Hello, students. How are you? I hope that this video finds you well. It's an honor to have the opportunity to be here again with you, sharing these important and amazing ideas that have been evolving with the psychology science. These three theories that we are talking, that they have been pretty much the three theories in psychology that have addressed the topic of personal growth in a more specific way. Last week, we were talking about existentialism. Today, we're going to talk about humanistic psychology and positive psychology. And those are the three theories that we're going to cover in this course in this semester, okay? All right, before we start with our conversation on those two topics or those two theories that I was mentioning, I want to say that I was very happy to read the comments and the introductions that you were leaving in the YouTube video of the previous week, of the last week. And it was an opportunity to know you better, to feel that I'm having an interaction with you, a conversation with you, because I do not mind to teach in online courses, but I always miss the opportunity of the face-to-face interaction, to see the real human being in front of me and having a conversation. So I thought that having those comments, those reflections in the YouTube videos will help me to feel like closer to you and to know you better. So I want to thank Claire, Nicole, Danielle, Lamia, Elijah, for your introduction, for your comments there. And I want to encourage all the other students to do that in every single video. I just want to remind you that in every single video, you need to leave a comment on what was the most interesting of that video for you, a reflection, things that you found interesting, things that you would like to know better, things that you are not understanding very well, and so on. So that helps me, or that serves me as evidence that you watched the video. And for you, that's the way that you are going to obtain your attendance in the class. Remember that the attendance is 10 points of your final grade. And to obtain the attendance in every week, you need to watch the videos and then leave in your comments. Okay? All right. Having said that, let's start with our presentation today. Let me share my screen so you can have access to the PowerPoint presentation that I prepared for you. And here we are. Okay. So as I was mentioning to you, today we're gonna cover session number 2, which is humanistic psychology and positive psychology. Last week, we were talking about existential psychology, which I found it very interesting. I think that it's a theory that has a lot to say, and it's a very original perspective on human development, human suffering, and human growth, the possibility to growth out of adversity and so on. Today, the two theories that we're going to be covering, they share some of the concepts and elements of existential therapy or existential psychology. It seems that they overlap, but they are also, I would say, they have their own characteristics. Therefore, we can consider them as distinct theories, a different type of theories. That again, they share some elements. The three of these schools, existentialism, humanism, and positive psychology, they share elements. But we need to have in mind that historically speaking, it was existentialism first, developed in Europe, then was humanism here in the United States, or humanistic psychology, and then it was positive psychology. So it has been a continuation from the work of the first existentialists, but then with some variations. So humanistic psychology has some variations, some elements that are different. and positive psychology also has many elements that are different, okay? So let's talk about that. These are the topics that we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about humanistic psychology first, then positive psychology, and finally, we're going to talk about your homework, all right? So let's start with humanistic psychology. Perhaps you remember that I say to you that every school of thought in psychology, they have their roots in different philosophical traditions. We talk on how existential psychology was a very clear example of what I'm saying, because existential psychology is what they do is pretty much they try to apply existential philosophical ideas in psychotherapy. Now, but that's the case pretty much in every single school of psychotherapy. So CBT has its roots in Stoicism. Psychoanalysis has its roots in perhaps in Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, that generation of philosophers that they had a huge influence in the German thought, in the German way of thinking, proposing that we were not able to understand everything that was happening to us. Yeah, maybe that's a good way of framing that. And then we're going to see today that humanistic psychology and positive psychology, they also have their own philosophical roots. So they are schools of thought in psychology that they have been evolving from philosophical thinking. And it is important to have that in mind, because some people make the mistake to think that all the schools of psychotherapy, they are doing the same, or that they mean the same, or that we can mix them and we can use them however we want, which that is what we call eclecticism, and is something that it's not appropriate to do. Actually, it's something that it's we understand eclecticism as a malpractice, okay? Why am I saying that? Well, because even though it sounds interesting that you can use something from psychoanalysis, something from existentialism, something from CBT, and then do whatever you want with your clients, well, that's not going to be helpful for your clients. Your clients need to have a framework. They need to have a structure on how to understand themselves, how to understand the problems that they are experiencing, and how to overcome those problems. And some of these theories, they overlap, as we are seeing, between existentialism, humanistic psychology, and positive psychology. But some others, they contradict each other. It's not that they overlap, it's that they are saying different things, different way of understanding human development, different way of understanding epistemology, different way of understanding human suffering and the way of overcoming human suffering. There's a different anthropological, philosophical view of what is a human person and how that human person develops, suffers, and overcomes suffering, okay? So that's why we want to be careful. Perhaps when we talk about existentialism, humanism, and positive psychology, we can play a little bit more with those concepts. But even though it's important to have in mind the differences between them, all right? Okay, so now when we talk about humanistic psychology, this is a movement that originally starts in the United States, evolves in the United States, and pretty much it's an American psychological theory, okay? Existentialism was very much a European, center European theory as a result of the First and Second World War, where some of these thinkers, they were completely astonished, completely overwhelmed, completely lost after seeing the level of suffering, the level of nihilism, the level of cruelty that human beings are able to do. And we need to remember that what happened in 20th century with those two wars is the result of a gradual process of de-Christianization in Europe. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But that de-Christianization, what happens is that create a vacuum when people don't believe in God anymore, when people don't attend church anymore, when people don't have the structure of religion in their life who helps them to have a framework to understand what is a human being and what are human relationships and what is suffering and what is the meaning of life. Well, what is left is a vacuum, and that vacuum is going to be filled in with different things. Sometimes it's philosophy, ideologies, and sometimes it's totalitarian government. And that's what happened in Europe. They thought that they would be able to find all the answers through reason and science, that they didn't need religion anymore. So they stopped attending church, they stopped believing in God, and the de-Christianization of Europe started happening. And what took place was those totalitarian regimes such as Nazism, fascism, and communism. They were all over the place. It was not only Germany and Russia, it was also Italy, it was also Spain, it was everywhere. And what happened, we know what happened, right? The solution is not there. So after that nihilism caused by the absence of God, by the way, Nietzsche, he was a prophet in that sense, because since the beginning of the 19th century, he was saying that what will happen is that Christianity will be abandoned by the European cultures. And that's what we know as the death of God, right? He was saying that God has died. And it was not a literal meaning of God has died, but the idea that humans have forgot God. God is not important for humans anymore. He was very critical of Christianity. He was an anti-Christian, I would say. Actually, he has a book that is called The Antichrist, okay? But he was also a prophet, because he was saying, once that Western societies, European societies stop believing in God, stop believing in Christianity and attending church, what is going to happen is 2 centuries of madness, 2 centuries of nihilism, 2 centuries of atheism that will evolve in totalitarian regimes and violence and so on. And he was right. So he was a critic of Christianity. He did want to see Christianity vanish, but at the same time, he knew once that happened, there's going to be so much turmoil that the consequence of that is going to be very difficult, like a lot of chaos. That's the word. And that's what we saw in 20th century, and that's what we're still seeing nowadays, right? So existentialists, which they were both Christians and non-Christians, theists and atheists, they saw what happened in the 20th century. They saw that vacuum that I was telling you, and the consequences of that vacuum when they tried to fill in with government and ideologies and so on. And they were questioning themselves, like, what's the purpose of life? What's the meaning of life? How do humans have to face suffering in life and all this adversity? They came to the conclusion that there's no meaning per se in life, but that you have to construct, to build meaning in your life, which that is radically different to what Christianity believes. Christians, we do believe that life has meaning, that we have been created with a purpose, that each one of us is the result of God's thinking. We are the result of a thought of God. Therefore, we have meaning and we have purpose, and we need to work towards that, right? Which is sanctity or holiness, depending on the tradition, we call them differently. But the idea of loving God and loving your neighbor, that's, I would say, that's the meaning of life for Christians. Therefore, you need to accept your cross, embrace your suffering, and pointing that suffering to a higher purpose, which is loving God and loving your neighbors, right? All right, so that was the existentialist. And then what happened is that in the United States, that, of course, United States was affected as well for the World War I and World War II. There was veterans that they were there, but United States didn't have that experience of nihilistic vacuum, emptiness of meaning or meaningless, that meaningless experience that the Europeans were experiencing. So existentialism was interesting, it was important for some Americans, but it was not as, I would say, dominant as it was in Europe. What happened here is that we saw revival of humanism. Humanism, it's a philosophy that was developed in the Renaissance in Europe as well, and we need to have that in mind, guys. Europe has been the mother of the Western civilization, so all the ideas that we have here in the United States, we can track them. We can track their origin to Europe, okay? So what happened is that after the medieval times, which, by the way, there are many lies right now about medieval times, saying that it was a very dark time and that it was a horrible time, which is not true at all. It was a very interesting time in human history. If you ever go to Europe, you will still see the cathedrals that people in medieval times they were building. It was so amazing. But even after 600, 700, 800 years, they're still magnificent. And we go there and we are like, this is amazing. Now, just think about how often we need to do remodelations in our houses here in the United States. Most houses, after 50, 60 years, they're gonna need that we fix a lot of them, that we change a lot of pieces of them, right? Now, those buildings have been magnificent for 700, 800 years, and with a very complex architecture, which is amazing, because at the time they didn't have any technology. They were able to build those amazing buildings. Not only that, the first universities took place in the medieval times. Science start developing in the first forms of it in the medieval times as well. It was a very interesting and exciting time. However, what happened is that when the medieval times were over and the Renaissance started appearing, the onset of the Renaissance, what happened was a change in human mentality. They moved from a theistic perspective of life to a humanistic perspective of life, which means they moved from having a theocentric God as the center, the meaning of everything in life, towards a human-centered perspective of life. Now, what it was important, it was the human person, the human, right? The human. The idea of human person is something that will come later on with a school of philosophy that it's known as personalism. But the idea of humans as the center of creation as the center of nature as the most important thing. And with that, it comes also the abandonment of God. So what we see nowadays, guys, what we see nowadays, this very secular society, it has its roots on that period in Europe, in the Renaissance. And in that Renaissance, everything starts changing. The way of people thinking, they move from God to human, okay? And we can see that in painting, in sculpture. So for example, if you ever go to Florence, which I strongly suggest you to go, and you see the David, el David de Miguel Angel, Michelangelo, I don't know how to pronounce Michelangelo in English. Michael Angel, I don't know. In English, the David, well, it's an amazing sculpture. You need to see it. It's an amazing, amazing, amazing sculpture. But it's a very different sculpture to what Europeans were doing for thousands of years. Now it was a celebration of human bodies, celebration of youth, celebration of human characteristics. And what happens is that science starts developing, philosophy start moving from God towards human development, human fulfillment, and so on. That was like the first stage of humanism, okay? And then little by little, humanism started moving from Italy and Central Europe to the north of Europe, to the south of Europe, and then those ideas travel to United States, and we start seeing the development of more recent ideas such as democracy and such as human rights and so on, okay? Okay, now what happened in the 20th century, remember that I was telling you about existentialists in Europe after the First and Second World War, but United States, they have a different experience because even though you sent veterans, you didn't have an invasion here. You didn't experience the war here in the territory of the United States. So existentialism was not as strong as it was in Europe. And what happened is that there was a renaissance, like a renewal interest for humanism. How can we promote human potential, okay? And in that context is where humanistic psychology start appearing, the onset of humanistic psychology in 20th century, okay? And this is a very important figure. I apologize for that. I'm gonna silence this. So this is a very important figure because he is the founder, I would say, of humanistic psychology. Before him, it was humanistic philosophy, humanistic science, humanistic painting, arts, but it was until Abraham Maslow that we start talking about humanistic psychology. The two most important figures from this movement are Abraham Maslow and then Carl Rogers, okay? Right, so let's talk a little bit about Abraham Maslow. He was born in New York in 1908. He was the son of poor Russian Jewish parents. They immigrated here, and Maslow, he experienced rejection, racism, he was bullied, because as you can see in this picture, he has a very Jewish physiognomy, very Jewish characteristics. And even though he was not practicing Judaism, at the time, it was a very difficult time for Jewish, right? So Maslow described himself as neurotic, shy, lonely, and self-reflective through his teens and 20s. This was in part because of the racism and ethnic prejudice he experienced owing to his Jewish appearance. He himself, however, was non-religious. That's very important, and we're going to talk about that in a moment because you can see life and work of these very intelligent authors. It's connected, okay? And And what you want to have in mind is that sometimes you cannot see the difference where their life experience and the work and the work or the theories began. Where's the limit? Where's the boundaries? Where's the borderline between them? And one of the things that I think is that many of these theories, they were developed with the intention to provide an explanation of many of the things that they were experiencing. And that is more evident when you read the biographies of these authors. For example, if you ever read the biography of Sigmund Freud or the biography of Carl Gustav Jung, you will see what I'm telling you. It's very evident that they were bringing their own psychological development in their theories. Right. So Maslow, he attended the University of Wisconsin to study psychology. Then he studied behaviorism, positivism, and Gestalt psychology. He is the founder of the, he was the founder of the psychology department at Brandeis, and he taught there from 1951 to 1969. So Brandeis College is very interesting because even though Abraham Maslow is one of the most important American psychologists, he didn't receive credit in Brandeis College. He was working there for a long time, 18 years. He was the head of the department, but he was a lot of contention with his co-workers, with other faculty members, because it was a time where behaviorism was the dominant psychological theory in the United States. So most of the psychologists, they want to belong to behaviorism because behaviorism is a very science, objective, evidence-based oriented theory. And they want to present themselves as scientists. And the ideas of Maslow, the whole ideas of humanism and humanistic psychology, they were not compatible with behaviorism. Even though Maslow didn't see it in that way, but behaviorists, they did see it in that way. And because of that, Maslow had a challenging experience with his co-workers in his department. He was spending a lot of time out of the college, traveling around the country, promoting his ideas. But he was not doing that in the college because he was not very well received there. And even nowadays, you will say like, well, he's one of the main figures on American psychology. Brandeis College should be like proud of their history, right? And having like a monument or having something to remember that Maslow was working there for 18 years. They have none of that. It's very interesting. And that happened not only when Maslow was alive, that's still happening. Many psychologists are resistant to Maslow's ideas because they cannot be tested, they cannot be proved, because they lack that scientific approach that behaviorism or CBT has, okay? So some of the main books of Maslow are Motivation and Personality, Toward a Psychology of Being, and The Farther Reaches of Human Nature. I would suggest you buy the books, read the books. It's important that you get familiarized with the original text of these important authors so you can build your own idea on who was this man, what was his theory about, and that you can build your own criticism about them. If you only read the textbooks where they are providing summaries or papers where they are providing summaries, you're going to have a limited experience of what were they talking about, okay? All right. So Maslow, he thought that there was 3 waves in psychology. Now, this idea of 3 waves have been used in other areas as well. For example, in CBT, we talk about 3 waves of CBT. Anyway, but Maslow, he said, there has been 3 waves, 3 forces, 3 stages of psychology. The first one is the disease model and psychoanalysis. He was thinking psychoanalysis and behaviorism with the medical perspective of people are sick and we need to cure them. It was the first stage. Sorry, I said that behaviorism there, but not. It was psychoanalysis and the medical model, that you have something wrong and we are going to cure you. Then the second wave is behaviorism, with the idea that context and learning, it's everything that you need to explain human behavior. You don't need concepts such as free will, conscious, emotions to explain human behavior. Just context, contingency of consequences, and learning processes, okay? And then Maslow, he saw his humanistic psychology as the third wave, the third school, the third force in psychology, which at his time, it was very popular and is still very popular, but that's especially true here in the United States, guys. If you go to Europe, it's not as popular. If you go to Latin America, it's not as popular. It's very American-oriented psychology, okay? Now, Maslow called the waves 1 and 2 the sick half of psychology. He thought these two first models, they were focusing in what makes people to feel bad, but not what makes people to feel good, what makes people to develop appropriately. And he saw his humanistic psychology as an intent, as a theory that will bring answers to that will complete the healthy half of psychology, I will call it, okay? All right, now, but what is humanism? What is a definition of humanism? As I say to you, it's a philosophy that we can track the origins of this philosophy, even in the ancient Greek with Cicero, okay? But that it really started taking place in the Renaissance, as I explained to you, moving from the medieval times to the Renaissance, and then little by little moving through Europe to United States and pretty much all Western societies. And then here in the United States, the development of humanistic psychology. Okay, but what would be a definition of humanism? If we need to define what is humanism, generally speaking, a definition that could incorporate the philosophical concepts, the political concepts, the artistic concepts, the psychological concepts. Well, this is one of those definitions. Humanism is a democratic and ethical life stance. Okay, so there are two elements there, democracy and ethics as a fundamental elements of life, which affirms that human beings have the right and responsibility to give meaning and shape to their own lives. Another important element there. That's something that they share with existentialists. They do not believe that life has meaning, as we Christians believe. They believe that we need to shape that meaning, that we need to build that meaning, okay? It stands for the building of a more humane society through an ethic based on human and other natural values in the spirit of reason and free inquiry through human capabilities. That sounds awesome, right? They talk about a more humane society that is based on ethics, natural values. They do believe that there are natural laws that we need to follow it, and reason, okay? So again, a society, a humane society that is built based on ethics, natural values, and reason, okay? Through human capabilities. That means that we need to develop our capabilities at the maximum so we can develop both the individual and the society in the best way. So it sounds very nice. But here's the last part of the definition. It is not theistic, and it does not accept supernatural views of reality. Again, it is not theistic and it does not accept supernatural views of realities. This is the definition of Humanist International, which is a very important organization, very influential. They have a lot of influence in the UN, in the World Health Organization, and the UNICEF, okay? And what basically say in that last statement is we are against God. We are anti-theist. We do not believe in God, and we do not accept supernatural views of reality. So that's the problem with humanism. And that's something that people are not thinking deeply about it. People are not understanding when we embrace humanism, that embracing humanism is embracing a position against Christianity, okay? It's against the idea of God. Humanism is the origin of atheism in the way that we understand atheism nowadays. And humanism is responsible pretty much, I would say, it's responsible in a very important ways of the secularity that we see in Western society nowadays. So even though they have this beautiful purpose, they also have this element where they consider that religion is negative for human development, that religion is something that we should get rid of it. And they have been very active promoting anti-religious ideas, anti-God ideas, anti-Christian ideas. And they have been developing these black legends about Christianity, and more specifically against Catholicism, because they have a purpose of a world that can be developed, that can be beautiful, that we all can live in a very nice way without God and the religion. So if you remember the John Lennon's song Imagine, which is beautiful, right? It's the sound, the lyric, everything, it's very sticky, right? Imagine there's, all right? Okay, but pay attention to what the song says. It says, imagine there's no heaven. Imagine there's no, well, I can remember the lyric deeply, but it's the whole idea that there's no God, there's no heaven, there's only here and now, and we all love each other, we all are very nice, we all are very good people, all right? Okay, so what does that mean for the humanistic psychology? Well, humanistic psychology develops from there. And humanistic psychology shares the idea that humans need to be ethical, that humans need to be responsible, that humans need to build their own meaning in life, and that to do that, they need to have values, and they need to have the use of reason and the development of human capacities. And humanistic psychology also thinks that the idea of God is not necessary, that humans do not need to have God in their lives to develop in their full potential, okay? Now, as you can see, it's a very conflictive proposition with Christianity. If we take Christianity seriously, it's very difficult. Now, there have been many authors that they have tried to conciliate this. There have been some few humanists that they are also religious, but they believe that God is there and God do not interfere with human issues. Therefore, yes, God exists, but we don't need to think about God because everything is about our human development and the human potentialities, right? Having said that, psychology, it's a challenging science for those of us that are Christians, and especially if we take seriously the war of ideas, if we take seriously the idea that ideas have consequences. And one of the consequences of humanism that has been spread out all over Western civilization is the secularism and the decline of religious beliefs, okay? All right, now having said that, you as students of psychology, I will say you need to learn these theories with a critical thinking perspective. And you need to see what is good on them, what is not good on them, and how can we try to develop a Christian perspective of some of these ideas, understanding that they are not completely compatible, but also understanding that Christianity has, in my opinion, has all the answers, okay? Perhaps if you're gonna be my students in Capstone, I wanna talk about Christianity and psychology and to say why Christianity has all the answers, even from a psychological perspective, all right? Anyway, so if you want to know more about definitions of humanism, you can go to this link that I'm sharing with you. In that link, you will see many other definitions, and you will see pretty much all of them. They include the same elements that I'm saying here: the idea of ethics, the idea of reason, the idea of human development, both individual level and societal level, and the idea of being not theistic, being atheist, being against theism, okay? Which again is very controversial for me. And I don't understand why so many Christian counselors and Christian psychologists, they don't mind about, they don't stop to think about that, they don't reflect on that, and it's like if they decide not to think about that. And I think that that is not appropriate. We need to have a conversation with these theories, and we need to see how are we going to integrate them with a Christian perspective, okay? All right, so what are the main components of humanistic psychology? Number one, people are innately good. Therefore, morality, ethical values, and good intentions are the driving forces of human behavior. It sounds very nice, but I think that they have that wrong. And I think that existentialists, they have a better perspective on human nature, because existentialists will say to you, humans are innately good and innately evil. Good and evil is something that exists inside humans. And depending on your decisions, you're going to develop either one area or the other area. But you have the same possibility to become a killer or become a saint, because both evil and good are fundamental elements of your human nature, right? And it depends on you, on your decisions, on your choices, on the way that you respond to life, if you're going to become one or the other. Well, for humanistics, they have a different perspective. I think it's very romantic. They think that humans are innately good. And therefore, they think that society corrupts that inner good in humans. And because society corrupts that goodness, then humans are going to develop mental problems and also inappropriate behaviors, right? Now, as you can see, they blame society. They don't take responsibility, but they blame society for their problems. Now, there's something that it doesn't make sense to me about that as well, because think about what are the years on a human person that person will display more violent behavior. Well, those years are infancy and childhood. If you ever go to a daycare, you will see that kids there, they are mean, they are cruel. They punch other kids, they kick other kids, they take the things of other kids, and they don't care. The kid is in the floor crying, hurt, and the other kid is happy with the toy that he took from that kid, right? And we as adults, we don't think that that is bad, but it is. It is for the kid that is in the floor suffering because he has been punched. And those are the years where humans display more violent behavior than any other stage of human development. What we see is the opposite of what the humanists believe. What we see is that society, culture, shapes human behavior, shapes human nature, shapes human instincts. Again, existentialists, they will say, you have instincts to do all these things. But it's through culture that we learn to contain those instincts, those behaviors. So when our parents are punishing us, when they are giving us consequences, when they are giving us instructions, they are not impacting our nature negatively as the humanistic beliefs. They are telling us there are things that you can do and things that you cannot do. Because if you do those things, you're going to hurt other people. And if you hurt other people, you're going to end up hurting yourself. Because then no one will like to be with you. So that's what we see with kids in the playground, right? When we see kids that parents are kind of neglectful or permissive with them, they don't have boundaries, rules, consequences. Those kids do not know how to behave in those playgrounds. They want to be the first in everything. They do not respect the lines. They can kick other kids because they want to be the first. And what happens is that other kids start isolating those kids. Are like, I don't want to be with you because you're a bully, right? That's what we do also in society with grown-ups that have not been able to contain those forces inside of us. And they become violent, they become criminals. We put them in jail because we're like, we don't want to have you around us because you don't know how to behave in society. You don't know how to control yourself. So that's one thing of humanistic psychology that I think that it's a flaw on it, okay? Number two, adverse social psychological experiences, what we call psychopathology, can be attributed to deviations from natural tendencies. So what I was telling you, now if you have psychopathologies or you are violent and so on, it's a deviation of your natural tendencies. Society, it's corrupting you. That's why we see nowadays all this criticism to society, all these ideas, because they come from this humanistic perspective, putting the responsibility outside instead of inside. And that's a different thing to conciliate with Christianity as well. Jesus came here not to change political systems, right? Jesus came here to change human hearts, human conscience, human souls. As Christians, we believe that we need to change ourselves, that we are broken. We are part of this. In Trinity, we use this meta narrative: creation, fall, redemption, new creation. Because there's fall, we are sinful, and we need to change that. We need to redeem ourselves so we can come to a new creation. And number three, self-actualization, creativity, health, individuality, intrinsic nature, self, being, becoming, and meaning are the core elements of this approach. And I love all those concepts, okay? It's just that I have a different perspective on how to achieve those concepts, all right? I think that the best way to achieve those concepts is recognizing your sinful nature, recognizing the evil inside of you, and working hard, carrying your cross as Jesus commands us, so you can change yourself, you can transform yourself, all right? But those are very important concepts that we're going to see in a moment. So some fundamental assumptions of humanistic psychology include experiencing, thinking, sensing, perceiving, feeling, remembering, and so on, is central. So the whole idea of subjective experience, as you can see, humanistic psychology is not a objective-oriented psychology as behaviorism or CBT. It's a subjective-oriented psychology. What's your experience? How does that feel for you? What does that mean for you? 2, the subjective experience of the individual is the primary indicator of behavior. So it's not about what science says, it's not about what research says, it's not about statistically speaking, it's about you. What's your experience? What is really important for the humanistic? An accurate understanding of human behavior cannot be achieved by studying animals. So for them, the study of animals, it doesn't bring anything to human knowledge or understanding of human nature, because we are different than animals. Therefore, we shouldn't. We shouldn't. It's not relevant, those animal studies. Free will exists. An individual should take personal responsibility for self-growth and fulfillment. Not all behavior is determined. Now, I agree completely, 100% with that statement. Free will exists. We have the capacity to choose. Either I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. And I need to assume responsibility on my decision and the consequences of that. The problematic element here is that they were saying that we are innately good. Therefore, if we take wrong decisions, yes, we need to be responsible, but at the same time, we're blaming society and development because it's a deviation of original goodness. You see, Christians, we believe in original sin. Humanistics believe in original goodness. Okay, that's a good way to put it. Self-actualization, the need for a person to reach maximum potential is natural. And I agree completely on that. We are oriented towards the future. Since the moment that we are conceived, in that first cell, which is the zygote, that includes all your DNA, that includes all your chromosomes, 50% from your mom, 50% from your dad, all your genetic information, we're going to start orienting ourselves towards the future. From 1 cell to 2 cells, to 4 cells, to 8 cells, to 16, 32, 64, and so on, until we are billions and billions of cells. And every year, we are developing cognitively, physically, emotionally, because we have this orientation towards the future, to self-actualization. We're going to talk more about self-actualization in a moment. Very important concept for both existentialists and humanists. People are inherently good and will experience growth if provided with suitable conditions, especially during childhood, what we already talked about. Each person and each experience is unique, so psychologists should treat each case individually rather than rely on averages from group studies. All right. So now, having said that, after seeing those main principal or core elements of humanistic psychology, now we need to talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This has been very popular pretty much in every intro to the psych. They teach you this. However, there are a couple of things that I want to talk about. First, we have, according to Maslow, we have these 5 human needs. Later on, he added one more need, and I'm going to talk about that later. But he says physiological needs such as air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction, safety needs, personal security, employment, resources, health, property, love and belonging, friendship, intimacy, family, sense of connection, esteem, respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, freedom, and self-actualization, the desire to become the most that one can be. So he says that the first level of needs are the most important and will monopolize consciousness until they are addressed. And think about it, right? If you are hungry, if you are starving, if you are in a war place, if you are in the middle of earthquake, who cares if others love you or not? Who cares if you have recognition and respect from society? Who cares about becoming the most that I can be? What cares is, how am I going to survive? How am I going to overcome this war? How am I going to survive to this situation? How am I going to find food, right? So he has a point there. If we don't have those basic needs covered, human development becomes very difficult. Once one level of needs is taken care of, the mind moves on to the next level and so on until self-actualization is reached. Now, two things here. Number one, did Maslow really envision the needs as a pyramid? No, this pyramid that is so famous, it's not a Maslow thing, okay? It was the idea of another guy. He was working in business. This other guy, I can't remember his name, and he developed this pyramid because it looks very nice, right? Now, Maslow, he thought that they were hierarchic, but not in the shape of a pyramid. And he later on developed the thought that this idea that first you cover ones and then you move to the other ones is not necessarily like that. That in reality, they are in a constant dynamic where all of these are important all the time. So, and I think that's more accurate perspective. I want to suggest you to buy this book, Transcend. It's by Scott Barry Kaufman, The New Science of Self-Actualization. They call him Maslow 2.0. I don't know if he deserves that title, but it's interesting. And he first presents the theory of Maslow, and then he presents, I would say, like new ideas around it. Okay. Now we're going to talk about self-actualization. What is this self-actualization that Maslow and existentialists, they talk so much? Give me a second, guys. I apologize. I have a son with special needs, and he was in a situation, and I just start listening to him crying, and there's no one else here at home today, so I had to pause and attending him. So that's why you saw me like, what's going on with Dr. Guzman, right? Anyway, so we were talking about self-actualization. So very important concept for both existentialists and humanists. And the way that they understand this is the following. Is the tendency to actualize as much as possible individual capacities, the only drive by which the life of an organism is determined. So this Kurt Goldstein was a physiologist, MD, doctor, and he was the first on coming with the concept of self-actualization, the tendency to actualize as much as possible individual capacities, the only drive by which the life of an organism is determined. And he was right. We have evidence of that. We call it now plasticity. We call that our body has plasticity. That's why we have the possibility to heal ourselves. And also we call it neuroplasticity. We see our brain, the capacities to change and evolve and to develop new neurological pathways and reconfiguration. And in the case of a stroke or brain injury, our brain can take charge of the area that was damaged and develop new connections. Yeah, he was right on that. We have this tendency. Again, we are oriented towards the future, not towards the past. Maslow defined it as what a man can be, he must be. This need we may call self-actualization. So he was saying something like, a musician has to make music, a painter needs to make painting, and so a poet needs to make poetry, right? Because Maslow, he took this concept from Goldstein, and the way that he thought this is, you can be a unique version of humanity. And to do that, you need to develop what is that call that you have, right? Your vocation, we call it, and to follow that. Like there was this Catalan musician. His name was, what was his name? I cannot remember his name right now, but he said in his biography, when I was little, I heard music in my heart, and I followed that music all my life. Paul Casals, it was the name of that musician, okay? So that's self-actualization from Maslow perspective. This is a different definition. It's a psychological process aimed at maximizing the use of a person's ability and resources. This process may vary from one person to another. So Goldstein, he had a very physiological understanding of self-actualization. Maslow and Couture, they have a more psychological, romanticized idea of self-actualization. Now, there was something interesting with Maslow. After we studied the hierarchy of needs, later on in his work, close to the end of his life, he started making a change from a humanistic to a transpersonal psychology. Now, there's transpersonal psychology is a completely different theory, but has its roots in Maslow humanistic psychology. And they see Maslow as one of the pioneers of transpersonal psychology. It was very popular in the 70s and even in the 80s. But then we saw a decline of it because it was very difficult to test, very difficult to, they're still there. There's still a journal of transpersonal psychology, but it's not as popular anymore. But he came with this idea that I think is interesting. He says, transcendence refers to the very highest and most inclusive or holistic levels of human consciousness, behaving and relating as ends rather than means, to oneself, to significant others, to human beings in general, to other species, to nature, and to the cosmos. So he moves from self-actualization to self-transcendence. He thinks that self-actualization is good, is developing your potentials, but self-transcendence is even better because it's moving from an egotistic perspective to a transcendental perspective, to a generous perspective, to a more selfless perspective. That's why I include this picture here in this definition, because it's the idea that now that I have developed my capacities, I'm going to apply this, I'm going to use this for the good of others, for the good, for the common good, and even beyond that, for nature and cosmos and so on. He was still not talking about God, but he was talking about now about spiritual experiences. He was talking about these transcendental experiences, okay? And to do that, he talks about peak experiences and plateau experiences. He explained these peak experiences from a perspective of having like ecstasies, having mystical experiences, having what now we call in positive psychology flow in life, that is that moment of realization of I am capable and I'm sharing these with others, right? And then he talked about the plateau experiences. The plateau experiences, they were not just isolated experiences, but he was saying these are experiences that it's a state of being. It's a state of being. I'm constantly immersed in this self-transcendence experience. Now, as you can see, and this is what I found honestly, well, interesting, but at the same time, I don't know if I should call it dishonest from Humanistic. Many of these things are Christian ideas. Many of these things are Christian ideas, secularized Christian ideas, okay? And I think that Maslow, he realized that with pure humanism, it was not enough, that you cannot really find meaning and purpose in life just thinking on self-actualization, like a self-development, that you need to go beyond that. And as you can see in psychology, we talk a lot about the self, right? Self-esteem, self-actualization, and so on. And if we stay at that level, it's very egotistic. It's selfish, right? So I think he realized that. And he realized we need to move to a different stage, which is a selfless, or as he called it, self-transcendence. And Christianity is that. Christianity is denying oneself for the good of God and your neighbors. Christianity is a selfless religion where we understand that God's will is first than man's will, and that we need to follow that will, and that we need to do that in our relationship with others, looking for the common good and not the individual good. So humanistic can be very selfish, can be oriented just to the individual, but also in the latest work of Abraham Maslow, he includes this to trying to complement that, trying to avoid that selfish, egotistic perspective of humanistic. At least that's my perspective. Now, you are reading Viktor Frankl, which he was an existentialist. He believed in God, and I think that he believed that God was the ultimate existential reality, and because of that, the ultimate existential answer to the existential anguish that we experience in life. So he came with the same concepts, and that's why I was telling you that they overlap. If you ask me, I think that Maslow didn't provide credit enough to Viktor Frankl, and that he might, at the end of his life, he was reading him and taking some of his ideas and presenting those ideas in his work. But that's just my opinion. I'm not saying that that's what happened, okay? But in the book that you are reading, you're going to find this quote, and it says, "By declaring that man is responsible and must actualize the potential meaning of his life, I wish to stress that the true meaning of life is to be discovered in the world rather than within man or his own psyche, as though it were a closed system. I have termed this constitutive characteristic the self-transcendence of human existence." Okay? I'm going to repeat that. I have termed this constitutive characteristic the self-transcendence of human existence. See, it was Viktor Frankl's idea. It denotes the fact that being human always points and is directed to something or someone other than oneself, be it a meaning to fulfill or another human being to encounter. The more one forgets himself by giving himself to a cause to serve or another person to love, the more human he is and the more he actualizes himself. What is called self-actualization is not an attainable aim at all, for the simple reason that the more one will strive for it, the more he will miss it. In other words, self-actualization is possible only as a side effect of self-transcendence. I think it's beautiful. I think it's poetry, psychological poetry, I will say. I don't know what you think about it. And again, I think that humanists, they had a huge influence from the existentialists, to the point that here in the United States, they use the term of humanistic existentialist psychology, okay? Now, they don't use that concept in Europe, that term in Europe, but what I'm trying to say is humanistic psychology, it's the result of humanism, philosophy, and existential philosophy in an American way, all right? And it has many important elements. It has been positive in many sense, but also humanistic psychology, and in a wider perspective, humanism, generally speaking, in philosophy, in politics, in science, and so on, has been a detrimental of Christianity, the secularization that we already talked. All right, so here are some of the resources that you can, some of the references that I use for the presentation. You can consult them if you want. And now we're gonna move to positive psychology, okay? So we already covered existentialism, humanistic psychology, and now finally we're gonna talk about positive psychology. It's the last theory of human growth, personal growth that we're gonna cover in this course. All right, so to talk about positive psychology, we need to talk about Martin Seligman. Now, I would say he's the most well-known figure in positive psychology, but he's not necessarily the father of positive psychology, okay? As he and many others like to present him, okay? He's a very important figure. I like his work. Not 100%, but I would say 90%, okay? And he's a very important figure in psychology history. So he's a professor of psychology at University of Pennsylvania. He's still very alive. He's working a lot. He's very active, okay? That's his picture. He's very much like he looks very much like my father-in-law. It's like he's identical to him. Anyway, he's the former president of the American Psychological Association. He was the president in 2000, okay? He's the author of the theory on learned helplessness. And a very important theory. It's a theory that he developed before his positive psychology movement, where he found that humans and animals, we have a tendency to learn helplessness. And this can be explained as when you try to solve something and you cannot solve them, then you develop helplessness. He had an experiment with dogs. They put two dogs in mats, and these mats, they were giving electrical shocks. They were in cages. And one group of dogs, once that they received electrical shock, they could push a button or I think it was a button, and the electrical shock will stop. The other group of dogs, they will receive the electrical shock, and no matter what they were doing, pushing, trying to, whatever they were trying to do, the electrical shock will not stop. Then after several repetitions, what he did is that he brought the dogs to outside of the cages with electrical mats as well, and he gave them electrical shocks. The first group, those who were able to stop the electrical shock when they were pushing the button, what they did is as soon as they feel the electrical shock, they were moving from the electrical mat and they were fine. The other dogs, the ones that whatever they were doing, they were still receiving the electrical shocks when they were in their cages. Now that they were in the mats, now that they were not in the cages, and they received electrical shock, guess what they were doing? They were staying there, receiving electrical shock. And think about it. Human behavior, it can be explained in many different situations through learned helplessness. For example, when you think about Nazi concentration camps or Soviet concentration camps, where perhaps they were having 200 soldiers, but they were having 5,000 inmates. The question is why they didn't rebel against the soldiers, why they didn't fight against the soldiers. If they were 5,000, they could outnumber them, right? Yeah, you will say the soldiers, they have guns, yeah, and they will kill many of them, but not the 5,000 of them if they organize and they attack the 200 soldiers at the same time, right? Well, what happened is that Jewish, they tried many things before. They tried first at the beginning, going to the judges, forming political parties, going to the press, trying to sabotage some of the things that were happening, but none of that was working to them. So they were developing this hopelessness. There's nothing that we can do. That's one of the ways that I explain the situation going on in my home country. It's a desperate situation. It's overwhelming, horrible. Just yesterday, I received the news of a friend telling me my uncle has been kidnapped. And and that's something that happens every single day. My cousin, he was kidnapped 8 years ago. We still have no notice from him. We have accepted he has been killed after 8 years, right? It's a completely desperate situation what is happening there. And Mexicans, we do nothing, right? We complain, we talk, and so on. Why? But we don't take the arms, we don't try to change, we don't make a huge protest or something like what we saw in the summer, right? No. Why? Because there's this learned hopelessness going on there. You need to think that for 80 years in a row, we had the same political party in the government. So whatever you were doing will not have a positive outcome because every single time you will receive the same answer. So there's this learned hopelessness. Same thing can be applied for depression. Many people are depressed because they think that they cannot change their situation. There's nothing that I can do to make myself to feel better, okay? Very important theory. We still use that theory in many areas. But then he's nowadays better known as a pioneer of the current movement of positive psychology. But remember that I say to you that even though he and others like to present him as the founder of positive psychology, well, guess what? Abraham Maslow, remember when we talk about the half-seek of psychology? Well, he was also talking about developing a positive psychology. And he's the one who coined the term, okay? So I said that Abraham Maslow is the first positive psychologist. Now, nowadays, positive psychologists, they don't like that because they see Abraham Maslow as non-scientific psychologist, as his humanistic psychology as a non-scientific theory. And nowadays, positive psychologists, they see themselves as a very scientific oriented psychologists, okay? So they try to make that difference. Now, humanistics are not happy with that. And now you have a paper to read on one of that. One of those authors are saying like, no. Positive psychology is the continuation of humanistic psychology. I need to say something here. You might be like, oh, Dr. Guzman, there are so many theories. Yeah, there are many theories, okay? And there's an author, his name is Steve Hayes. He's the author of the theory that is known as acceptance and commitment therapy, very interesting therapy. And he said something very clever. He said, all theories are wrong. It's just a matter of time and to identify how and where and why are they wrong. But all of them are wrong. And that is science, guys. Science has not dogmatic truth. Science is the application of a method to try to understand reality better. And for that, we come with theories, and then we have to test those theories, and then we need to see if those theories are accurate or not, if they align with reality or not. Now, there's a problem because existentialists and humanists, they will say like, but I don't care the scientific method. I care the subjective method, the experience of the individual, right? Anyway, so we have so many theories because we are trying to understand reality, humans, in a better way. And I agree with Stephen Hayes, all theories are wrong. It's just a matter of time. Okay, so Martin Seligman says he's the author of many papers, many books. He has been very popular psychologist. And these books are like some of the books that I will suggest you: The Optimistic Child, Learn Optimism, Authentic Happiness, Flourish. And the last one, Character, Strengths, and Virtues, is the one that I like the most. Okay, it's a manual of character, strengths, and virtues. We're going to talk in week number 4. We're going to talk about that with more detail. All right. So, what is positive psychology? So, positive psychology can be defined as the scientific study of what makes life most worth living. Okay, let's start there. The scientific study of what makes life most worth living. So, we're going to use the scientific method, which is building hypotheses to observable phenomena, building a theory, then testing that theory to get data, then analyzing the data to see if the data supports or contradicts our theory. If it supports our theory, we're going to continue working on that theory. If it contradicts our theory, we're going to have to reimagine our hypotheses and theories and so on. So it's using the scientific method to identify what makes life most worth living. Why is life important? And how can we make the best of it? It is a call for psychological science and practice to be as concerned with strength as with weakness, as interested in building the best things in life as in repairing the worst, and as concerned with making the lives of normal people fulfilling as with healing pathology. So what they are saying is, Martin Seligman, in his inaugural APA presidency, he gave a speech, and he took the same ideas of Abraham Maslow, although he didn't credit him. Okay, that was bad. Okay, and he said, psychology for the last century has been studied what makes people bad, what makes people sick, what makes people suffer, but has not studied what makes people grow, what makes people to be strong, to develop positively. Now has come the time for psychology to study that area. And that's positive psychology, okay? That's what they are trying to do. They do not deny psychopathology. They do not deny human suffering. They do not deny that things can go wrong, but they highlight that things can go well and that you can do something for that to happen. It's very, what's the word that I'm looking here? It's a very self-agency theory oriented. You can do something to be good, to be happy, to be fulfilled in life, to feel satisfied with your life, to find meaning in life. There are things that you can do. And we're going to tell you what are those things, because we have the scientific method that it's backing us up. Okay, you see the difference? Existentialists, humanistic, and positive psychology, they all are talking about the same, but in different ways, with different perspectives and highlighting different elements. And positive psychology is going to do it with the scientific method. So positive psychology focuses on positive experiences like happiness, joy, inspiration, and love. Positive states and traits like gratitude, resilience, and compassion. You know why those concepts have become so popular in the last 10, 15 years? It's because of the work of positive psychology. And positive institutions, which means applying positive principles within entire organizations and institutions. So they have been working with school systems. They have been working in industries, companies, even in the army. Martin Seligman, he received a very, 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 very important grant, something like $200 million or something like that. I was mind-blowing when I read the news. I was like, wait, what? That was amazing, right? And it was to develop a program of resilience for soldiers with the intention of preventing them to develop PTSD when they go to combat. So it was, instead of after receiving PTSD, after developing PTSD, it was before developing PTSD, before being exposed to traumatic events, before going to combat. We're going to give you this resilience program to make you stronger, so you can cope with the adversity that you're going to face in combat better, and that you don't develop PTSD. Now, it's my understanding that the research was not as successful as they thought, that the numbers of soldiers having PTSD, it was not as successful as they thought. But this, I'm saying this from the criticism that I have read, because I haven't read the original research, so I might be wrong, okay? But if that's the case, well, that was very bad invested $200 million from us, from our taxes. All right. Well, from your taxes, guys, because that was before the time that I was here, so I'm sorry for you. All right, so positive psychology are very concerned about the issues of happiness and well-being and what we call the good life, okay? So in Martin Seligman, at the beginning of this new era of psychology, as he called it, he developed a theory of what he called the authentic happiness, which is what the Greek philosophers call eudaimonia, okay? Eudaimonia, which for the Stoics was the virtue of all virtues. It was like the ultimate achievement in life. It's different from hedonistic happiness. For the Greek, eudaimonia was a result of living according to the four cardinal virtues, such as courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom. Christians, we sometimes use different names for those virtues. We call them fortitude, temperance, justice, and prudence. Yeah, I think it's, yeah. Anyway, so this eudaimonia that was achieved by living a virtuous life was an idea present in the Greeks. And what Martin Seligman did at the beginning of this new era of psychology was like to try to bring that concept alive again with what he called authentic happiness, because we live in a very hedonistic society, which means the better you feel, the more happy you are. So that's why we are so pleasure-oriented That's why we think in terms of what makes me feel good. That's what I need to work for. But the Greeks, they thought that was some schools of thoughts in the Greek philosophy, such as Stoicism. They thought that was not appropriate because they thought, what if life is difficult? Does that mean that life doesn't have meaning? So pleasure shouldn't be your ultimate goal in life, but a virtuous life should be your ultimate goal. So Martin Seligman was trying to bring that back again, talking about the authentic happiness, trying to make a distinction between transitory happiness, transitory pleasure versus a real permanent experience of happiness, right? And his theory at the time had three elements: positive emotions, engaged life, and meaningful life. He said, you need to have more positive emotions than negative emotions. Let's accept all of us that we will have negative emotions, but you need to work to develop positive emotions. And he was saying negative emotions, they're going to be there, they're going to be activated and automatically, but positive emotions, you need to work for them. So you need to find a way to bring positive emotions to your life. But he thought that's just like the basement, okay? That's just like the foundations. Then he says, engage in life. And he developed, along with other authors, the concept of flow. That's when people flow, when people develop their human potential and dedicate that in an area. And so, for example, when you are very passionate for something, when a musician is playing his guitar or his piano or his violin, and it's completely engaged on that, it's in a flow. When a painter is doing his painting and it's very engaged on that, it's a flow. For example, I like mountain biking. And when I'm mountain biking, when I'm in the mountain, no one around me, it's just the bike, me and the nature. And I'm going up hills, going down hills, doing drops and things like that. I feel that flow and everything stops, like every concern, every anxiety, it vanishes. It's not there because I'm engaged in that moment. That's flow. And then he said, but that's not enough because you cannot be in that flow all the time. And you can play a lot of music or you can be in that mountain bike all the time, but that's not necessarily going to bring meaning to your life. So he said the third element of this authentic happiness is developing a meaningful life. And for that, you have to develop your virtues, your strengths of character. We're going to talk about that later, the virtues and character and strengths. But guess what? Then in 2011, he changed his mind and he said like, okay, that's not what we should be doing. And I'm going to read him. He says, for now, I want to give just one example of why happiness theory fails abysmally as the sole explanation of how we choose. It is well established that couples with children have on average lower happiness and life satisfaction than childless couples. If evolution had to rely on maximizing happiness, the human race would have died out long ago. So clearly humans are either massively deluded about how much life satisfaction children will bring, or else we use some additional metric for choosing to reproduce. Similarly, if personal future happiness were our sole aim, we will leave our aging parents out on ice, flows to die. So the happiness monism not only conflicts with the facts, but it is a poor moral guide as well. What is he telling us here? It's very interesting. He's telling us happiness cannot be your goal in life, okay? Period. So those people who say like, what I want for my children is that they can be happy. No, that should not be your aim as a parent. What I most want in this life is to be happy. No, that should not be your aim. Because happiness is selfish, is egotist, and is limited. You cannot be happy forever. Life is suffering, as the Buddha was saying. And sooner or later, you're going to encounter that suffering. And if your solely goal is to be happy, what are you going to do? So he continues. So the happiness monism not only conflicts with the facts, but it is poor moral guide as well. From happiness theory as a guide to life choice, some couples might choose to remain childless. When we broaden our view of well-being to include meaning and relationships, it becomes obvious why we choose to have children and why we choose to care for our aging parents. So he's telling us a better goal in life, a better aim in life than happiness is meaning, is well-being as a consequence of meaning and relationships. And I can tell you, I have 3 children. And I came to this country. I left everything behind. And I came to this country to give my youngest the opportunity to receive medical attention and to have possibilities in life. And it was hell for my wife and myself. It was very stressful times in our lives. And happiness was not a constant in our lives. There was desperation, uncertainty, even depression. But even though it was meaningful, and because it was meaningful, it was beautiful. And that's a very Christian message. Jesus was not happy in the cross. Jesus was not happy when he was tortured, when he was abandoned, when he was betrayed. But even though Jesus decided to die in the cross, because it was meaningful, because he knew that he had a purpose, and that purpose had meaning, and it was the salvation of us, of all of us. So, you see, happiness cannot be your goal in life. Martin Seligman is right on that, and I'm happy that he elaborated more his ideas. So after that change, by the way, you can go to this link and you're going to find a reflection of Martin Seligman on what we are saying. So after that moment of crisis on his happiness theory, he developed a new model of well-being. He called it PERMA. Well-being is a construct, and well-being, not happiness, is the topic of positive psychology. Well-being has 5 measurable elements that count toward 1, positive emotion. He still thinks that positive emotions are important, and I'm all about that. I love food, I love beer, I love tequila, I love music, I love being in the outdoors, I love bonfires with my family, I love watching a nice movie, I love having positive emotions in my life. So, of which happiness and life satisfaction are all aspects of positive emotions. Engagement, the idea of flow, he still believes in that. You still need to engage in life. You need to develop yourself, your human qualities, so you can engage in your works, in your work, in your hobbies, in your relationships, that you can experience that flow. Relationships, this is enormously important. We talked last class about how loneliness is poisonous. And some of you had a very clever reflection and said, like, but I am, even though I'm alone, I'm not lonely because I always have Jesus Christ. And we know that God is a relationship between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Therefore, we are called to relationship. And if it's not possible to have a relationship with other humans, it's always possible to have a relationship with God and with ourselves. So relationships are important. Those who have friends, those who that are married, those who have children, they're going to do better in physical health, mental health, and so on. meaning and purpose. Now, what's the difference between meaning and purpose, Dr. Guzman? You have been talking a lot about those concepts. What is the difference? Well, think about this, guys. You can work in a factory, such as the factories that they build cellular phones, and you can be in the chain suministro. I don't know how to say it in English. Suministro. Oh, that change areas, and you can be the person that your only job is to put a chip to each one of the cellular phones. You're going to do that 8 hours a day, 5 or 6 days per week. You have purpose. Your purpose is putting that thing in the cellular phone, the chip. Now, is that meaningful? No, it's not. That's why people who work in those companies, they have higher rates of suicide and depression. So meaning is when we see that what I am doing has a positive impact in myself and in others. So Jesus had purpose, but also had meaning. His death was not meaningless. Some people, they are able to cope with physical suffering such as cancer because cancer becomes meaningful. And they say, like, all the pain and suffering that I experienced, I'm going to offer for those who are not close to God. I'm going to offer for those who need God in their life, or those who are suffering. Suddenly, that suffering becomes meaningful. So it's not, having purpose is not enough. And that's why it's important to reflect about, what am I going to do for a living? Because I can work and receive money. And that's what happened with many people, that they are able to make a lot of money, but their life has no meaning, right? Then they ended up dying, killing themselves. On the other hand, there are people that perhaps they don't do a lot of money, but they have a lot of meaning in what they do, and they experience satisfaction with that. An accomplishment. Accomplishment means, well, I can be satisfied for what I'm doing with my life. So that's the new model of well-being called PERMA by Martin Seligman. And he says, the upshot of this is that well-being cannot exist just in your own head. Well-being is a combination of feeling good as well as actually having meaning, good relationships, and accomplishment. The way we choose our course in life is to maximize all 5 of these elements. So it's something that we do for ourselves, for others, and also to experience satisfaction with our lives. All right? All right. So, and this, I'm not going to spend time on this. I just want to tell you the character strengths and virtues that I was telling you. I'm going to talk more about this on week number 4. Just have in mind, right now, Martin Seligman and Peterson, they think that there are 6 universal virtues that they found in religion, cultures, literature, philosophy all over the world. Wisdom, courage, humanity, temperance, justice, transcendence. And then they think that each of these virtues is constituted by strengths. So, for example, wisdom, creativity, curiosity, love of learning, judgment, and so on. Okay, I just brought this for you because I knew that I will be talking about this, and I just want you to present this initially. But in week number 4, we're going to talk more about this, and I have an activity for you on that week that is going to help you to identify your virtues and strengths. All right? All right, here are the references for the positive psychology lecture that I just shared with you. And now let's go to talk about your homework. I noticed that some of you were confused about your homework. What readings are you talking about? Okay. So what you have to do is that you need to read these. Oops, I apologize. Let me go. You need to read these 4 readings. You have these in your syllabus. I'm going to share with you a PDF of this presentation, so you're going to have them there too. And once that you read these 4 papers, you have to develop your own paper with your ideas about it. You have to answer the following questions. What do you like the most about each model? Existentialism, humanistic, and positive psychology. What are the similarities and differences between the 3 models? Which of these 3 models would you choose to practice if you become a counselor or psychologist? Okay. Try to answer these questions at the time that you develop the ideas, like a summary of the models, so I can see that you really understood these models. Okay. It's a 3 long pages paper. And the due date is November 6th at 10 p.m., so next Saturday. Now, 3 long pages of content. You have, it's important that you include a cover page, abstract page, and a reference page. So it should be a total of 6 pages, okay? Page number 1 is a cover page. Page number 2 is abstract and summary. Page 3, 4, and 5 is content, and page 6 is reference. I think that I share with you a link on how to write with APA style, so please be careful with that. In that link, you're also going to find about the abstract and the summary, how you need to write that. The abstract needs to be no longer than 250 words. And the abstract needs to include keywords, at least 4 or 5 keywords, okay? Of the keywords, the most important words that you're going to be using in your paper. All right, so having said that, I want to thank you for your attention. I hope that you like this lecture. We have concluded with the 3 theories that we're going to study in this semester. And I'm going to be happy to read your papers and to see you next week. And by the way, remember, you need to leave a comment after watching this video. And that comment is going to be your attendance for this week, all right? So you can leave what you like the most, what was the most interesting, what are the things that you didn't like, what are the things that you want to, that were difficult, or do you need to study more, or whatever you want to share with us, okay? About this content, of course. Have a great night and see you soon.